Should mass killers' names be used in the media, and does the media influence others to copy the actions of mass killers? One of the first highly publicized mass shootings was at the Columbine School. The reason why this particular shooting was so popular in the media's eyes was because the internet was so new at the time. There was also a lot of coverage over the event as it was unfolding and of the aftermath. Many of the local newspapers printed stories about the event and made claims that were not correct about why they committed the shooting in the first place. This type of coverage over something this terrible created somewhat of a copycat effect because of the amount of information that they released about what happened and why the shooters committed this act. It also initiates other people to try and want to act out this type of event. The amount of people who read the news stories can make their own opinions about why they did it, and it can end up being glorified depending on their ideology and if it matches that of the shooters. Today, the media actually came up with a term called the Columbine effect because of how many mass killers look up to or compare themselves with the Columbine shooters. There was an investigation done that went through data from news coverage and public records that came to the conclusion that there were 74 plots of mass shootings that related to the Columbine massacre in some way. For example, there was a guy named Artem who committed a shooting in Russia who went back to his old high school and shot and killed 15 people and wounded at least 20 others. He was heavily influenced by the Columbine shooters because he had multiple firearms with keychains that referenced the Columbine school attack and shooters Eric and Dylan. Also similar to the two Columbine shooters, he had similar ideology about other people, and he might have been able to research their opinions because of the extensive media that was released about why they committed the shooting as well. Other examples were the Ocala shooter who researched the Columbine attack, and he even wore a trench coat and other articles of clothing that Dylan and Eric wore. There has been said that a contagion effect has been happening where the occurrence of one mass shooting increases the likelihood of another mass shooting. This is because the extensive media coverage can give those who are easily influenced by certain events to commit this type of act. The amount of news coverage provides a lot of information about why the person committed the mass killing as well as their ideas and background. On another note, I think that bringing the mass killer's name into the scenario only causes more problems because people are able to glorify a single person or a group of people. Sometimes it can be one of the reasons why someone might commit a mass shooting simply because they want their name to be known. Also, research from the NPR news site says that releasing a mass killer's name can only serve to glamorize their actions and increase the likelihood of a copycat killer. Some media sites are trying not to use terms that can make the mass killer or the act of killing people seem glorified.
Overall, there are also critics and supporters for erasing a killer's name, especially a mass killer's in cases. Some of the critics of erasing a killer's name say that it puts focus on the victims and their issues rather than the actual killer themselves. The focus of the crime is on them and how they are hurt rather than the killer themselves, what they did, and how to address what they did and why they did, and instead looking for a solution, we instead just focus on the victims and lose sight of finding a solution. It also is said to create a mass killer weather effect. This is when we start to look at mass killings and school shootings as more of just the weather. Oh, it's just another one, let's move on. And you can see that with the amount of mass killings and how little and short the news coverage for them is compared to previous incidents like Columbine. And with this, it also creates a contagion of copycats because there are more influence and incentives to go further in order to be more known rather than just becoming a part of a list and a reason why, and then the killers will reference each other. However, these are also reasons that people say you shouldn't put their name out there, because for these exact same reasons it would support creating a new mass killer. However, the opposition to that says the name will still get out. As you can see with any mass killing that happens or school shooting, even if the media doesn't release the name, on other forms of media, social media and that, the mass killer's name will still be found online soon after the act is committed. So this begs the question, is there a middle ground between not using the killer's name and keeping it relevant without erasing it, the relevance to it? So they say what could go in? The background to the mass killer, were they white, male, female? what race were they, ethnicity, did they have weapons to access it, how do they access these weapons, and the reasons for these actions, whether they're stated, given, or learned later on. And the idea of this is to keep the relevance of all parts of them and maybe leave out the name, so that way the impact and the solution can still be looked for without perhaps creating a copycat influence from the name and the fame. And with this, we look at social media and how that can influence copycat killers and be used in mass shootings. One aspect of social media rather than traditional media is that it doesn't adhere to the rules of keeping the names out of the mass killer and who they are, like traditional media does, where they won't reveal that, and they've gotten into a habit of that, even though it's sort of an unspoken rule. Social media doesn't follow that, and it can be immediately so found. And social media also creates more fame and attention to it because it will still be covered, and people in social media will look at it, and some pockets who are very interested in it may idolize them through social media in smaller groups rather than traditional media, which stops covering it. And so it could create a copycat by somebody who is in that in group looking at it and interested in it. It also allows for a greater access to information for copycats to look at, oh, how did they do this? Why did they do this? Look at the manifesto of the mass killer and school shooters rather than just that. And it allows them to greater outreach themselves to try to take themselves famous through social media and live streaming. There was a case where in Buffalo the mass shooter live streamed the incident. However, it was quickly taken down from public live streams. It was only privately live streamed. So again, they still found a way to spread their fame. And with this and that, it creates fans of mass killers because, as mentioned, they can live stream it, they can advertise themselves. It's its own little pocket world rather than traditional media, which is just going to cover what happened. Social media allows for growth in them, intrigue, people who are curious about why they did that. Maybe in some cases you've seen people who are attracted to the serial killer with a fascination towards them. And with this sort of social media presence, as mentioned, it allows for a greater longevity than traditional media, which will cover it. And even though there was previous longevity and now traditional media, there isn't much longevity, social media creates a longevity of interest where there are going to be groups that follow these mass killers and serial killers and school shooters to just look at them, review them, and it's the only focus they have. And it creates a sort of longevity and intensity that can lead to greater copycats. And now we start to look at serial killers and compare serial killers to mass killers and how they are both similar and different in their copycats and actions and the media coverage.
From the beginning of time. It's something that occurs all over the world, but it's our job to prevent the violence from happening to innocent people and to punish those who have offended or taken people's lives in our society. We believe that crimes won't stop because people are being influenced by the bad that has occurred in the past or to what is going on in the current world that we live in. One crime that is very significant in our history is the Zodiac killer. The Zodiac killer is known to be one of America's most infamous killers during the 1960s and the 1970s. Zodiac murdered at least 5 people, often couples in secluded areas near San Francisco, and his first victim was Cherry Jo Bates. He wrote a confession about her, including a message to beware. See, the media has been captivated by the Zodiac killer because of his relationship with the media. He started by sending coded messages taunting police to various newspapers very soon after his first murder. And he would sign letters with a plus sign over it that signified his symbol. He infamously sent ciphers that said, "This is the Zodiac speaking." He would send codes that till this day hasn't been cracked, and the Zodiac killer case remains unsolved. One recent copycat of the Zodiac killer is known as Herberto Cita from New York. Cita's crimes was inspired by the infamous San Francisco-based Zodiac killer who was active in the 1960s and never got caught. The Zodiac name comes from the original killers who gave himself the title and the message that he would send to the public. Cita would write a message to the police ahead of his crimes and include notes about his victims. Cita is now 55, currently serving a 232-year sentence in prison. The differences between mass killers and serial killers. Mass killers, the media doesn't reveal information about their name, and copycats often don't follow exact methods, instead opt for ideas and meanings, seen more as epidemic in need for a solution. While serial killers, once discovered, media will reveal and cover all information on them. Copycats attempt to follow exact methods and view uniquely and with interest rather than public issues.
Just to follow up, serial killers also tend to be more methodical and thought out, and however they do eventually get caught, whereas mass killers often also commit suicide at the scene, and it can be more for their own death and try its sort of last cry, where serial killers, it tends to be more for the meaning of it and the idea. Okay, good.